In the book of Revelation and in the book of Daniel, we are given a schedule, a timeline. We're going to go over that timeline in this video. Let's start off in Revelation chapter 11, verse 19. And the temple of God was open in heaven. There was seen in the temple the Ark of the Covenant. So when the temple is open, and in the temple is the Ark of the Covenant, this is the Day of Atonement. It was the one day of the year the high priest went into the Holy of Holies and before the Ark of the Covenant. So this is describing the Day of Atonement clearly. Then Revelation 12 is a continuation of that Day of Atonement, and there appeared a great wonder or sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon at her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child, travailing to birth, pain to be delivered. So we have this sign of the woman, Revelation 12, happening on the Day of Atonement, clearly. So we're going to make this message as clear to understand as possible, this timeline. Very clearly we see the Day of Atonement, we see a sign that happened in heaven, and then we have the schedule. And after that event, the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared of God where she should feed her. They should feed her 1,260 or 60 days. 1,260 days is 3.5 years. So after that sign, we have 3.5 years. Then in verse 14, and the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and a half a time. So we have the Day of Atonement. After the Day of Atonement, we have 3.5 years. And after 3.5 years, we have another 3.5 years. So here is our Revelation timeline. Very clearly we see Revelation chapter 12, the sign, the great wonder in heaven, the woman clothed with the sun, and the moon at her feet on the Day of Atonement. We know this happened on September 22nd, 2017, on a precise date. After this date, it clearly says she goes into the wilderness 1,260 days. That's what it says in Revelation chapter 12, verse 6. This is 3.5 years. Okay, so we have the Day of Atonement on the Enoch calendar. Then 3.5 years after that date. Then once that transpires, then we have a time, times, and a half a time. This is another 3.5 years, a total of 7 years. Total of 2,520 days. So that's Revelation 12, verse 14. So clearly we have a timeline in Revelation. So how do we know when this starts? Well, first, let's actually look at when the sign happened. Let's look at the sign. As most of you are familiar, we saw the fulfillment of this in the Revelation 12 sign in the heavens. As you can see, September 22nd, September 23rd, 2017, thus ushering in the Daniel 70 week. But we're going to attempt to make this as simple as possible to understand, because this is so important, this is so critical, and it's my hope that some of you will actually learn this and you can actually teach this and share this, because this is the proper interpretation. Now, it is not me who is setting dates. It is the Apostle John. It is the prophet Daniel. They are the 2 witnesses, okay? So they set the dates, not me. But there's a requirement of interpretation to understand, when does this happen? Okay, what other confirmation do we have of this witness? Okay, so we have this one sign, but that's one witness. Where are our 2 witnesses? Where are 2 witnesses to this event? Well, we can see here, we're in Daniel chapter 8, verse 13. We have posed to us 4 questions. We have 4 questions, and we have 2 saints. One saint is speaking to another, and one asks 4 questions. Those 4 questions are, how long will be the vision of the daily sacrifice? 2, how long to the transgression or abomination of desolation? 3, how long to give or cleanse the sanctuary? 4, how long to the host trodden underfoot? So, in order to understand this interpretation, you must
answer these 4 questions. Not only must you must answer them sequentially. So, we do find this in Daniel. So, Daniel chapter 8 gives us one answer. Our first answer is in the next verse, Daniel 8:14. One answered and said, unto 2,300 days, then the sanctuary is cleansed. Later on, we learn in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, we learn that from the daily sacrifice taken to the abomination of desolation set up is 1,290 days. So, we have 4 questions, and we have 2 pieces of information to go by. So how do we find these 4 points of interest? So the first one we have is unto 2,300 days, then this sanctuary is cleansed. So what we must do is we must go back to Revelation, okay? Because in Revelation, you can see it's a total 2,520 days, okay? And we're going to look to find the information to find this Day of Atonement. That's another witness to this, okay? So we have 3.5 years, 3.5 years, 7 years total. So we start from this point at the end, and we apply 2,300 days. So we go from here, and then we count backwards 2,300 days, and we have our first marker. The temple is cleansed, it says, okay? So we'll get into these highlights in a minute. But the important thing for us to understand is that we're in Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel chapter 8, there's someone called a little horn. There's also someone called a little horn in Daniel chapter 7. Herein is the interpretation. Most people say the little horn in Daniel 7 and the little horn in Daniel 8 is the same person. No, it's not. It's 2 different people. One is a forerunner, okay? One is the son of perdition. So, our first point of interest, going back 2,300 days from the 2,520 days, brings us here. Okay? What is this? This brings us our first question. How long will be the vision of the daily sacrifice? Okay. So the vision of the daily sacrifice, our first point, is right here. Now you can see it says vision of the daily sacrifice. So we'll get into what that means in a minute, but keep that in mind. So we have our first answer to question number 1. That vision of the daily sacrifice, or that point of interest, is right here. Then, remember what we saw earlier. It said, okay, once you know from the daily sacrifice is taken, but in the abomination set up, there will be 1,290 days. So then what we do is we go from this point where we saw the temple cleanse, we found this here, and we go back 1,290 days. Okay, so remember we started here, we work back here, we went here, now we work back another 1,290 days. Now we have the abomination of desolation set up. Okay, so thus we have the answer, question number 2. How long to the transgression or abomination of desolation? These questions must be answered in perfect sequential order. So now we have our second answer, abomination of desolation. Now, this is where we have a second application of 2,300 days, because we don't have all the answers in this timeline. We don't have the proof yet and evidence of when this event is, but Daniel does give it to us. So what we must do is we must realize, as we said, there's 2 little horns. Okay, so we saw the little horn in Daniel chapter 7. So now what we do is we apply this timeline, this marker of 2,300 days, a second time. And we go from this same point where we were here, abomination of desolation, 2,300 days. And you see, the temple cleansed. So here we had this point here, 2,300 days. Now we added a second time. Why? Because there's a second little horn. And now what we have to do is we're going back in time. Okay, and now you can see we have a little horn in Daniel chapter 8. This was Obama. Okay, so once we go from abomination that makes desolate, the temple cleansed. Okay, we backtrack 2,300 days. And when we do that, now you can see what happened. You can see that the host trodden. So this brings us to the question number 3. How long to give or cleanse the sanctuary? Well, we go from this point here to cleanse the sanctuary, temple cleansed, and we add 2,300 days. And we go back, and then you can see question number 4. How long to the host trodden underfoot? Well, the host trodden happens twice. It happens here, okay, because you have one marker, and there would be a trigger point. There would be a trigger point to this timeline which would tell us when this whole thing would begin. But it also tells us when Armageddon, because here, this is the end of the the end of the 7 years. The host trodden is Armageddon, okay? But the 2,300 days happens twice. It happens, we apply it here, then we have 1,290 days, and then we apply it here. Now what we have is a situation where we have something happening before the sign of the woman clothed with the sun. We have 790 days before this. Okay, there would be a trigger event. There would be the host trodden underfoot. There would be something that happened. We announced this ahead of time. The 9th of Av, July 25th, 2015, there would be some sign. Okay, and we saw that sign. We announced it first, but that was the Baphomet. That's why. But we're going to watch Obama very closely, especially around this time, and especially leading up to the Hebrew month of Av, which is the 5th month, and the 9th day, a day called the 9th of Av. We're going to watch what he does, if he does anything around this time period. This could be the trigger point to the Great Tribulation. So I'm trying to blow the trumpet in Zion. Because, guys, people don't know. And look at me, I'm just some guy in an apartment recording videos. I'm nobody, guys. But I'm telling you the truth. I'm giving you the accurate description of Daniel's timeline, because I told you about this 3 months ago, almost 4 months ago, that something would happen on the 9th of Av, and it did. It happened. Now, it happened because I understood Daniel's timeline is not just about what are the events in the 7-year tribulation, but what is the event that tells us when it starts. So I have a number of other videos on that, guys. There's a playlist called The Little Horn, which we talk about Daniel chapter 8. You can see what I said and when I said it. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. I knew something. If something happened on the 9th of Av, I knew it was this year is the trigger event. So what happens, guys, on the 9th of Av, if Daniel 8 is fulfilled, then there are 790 days until the beginning of the tribulation. So what I'm reading to you guys is the BBC. The BBC did an article on this statue. And it's called Decoding the Symbols of Satan's Statue. Okay, but let's look at the symbolism here. The original drawing, guys, was 1856 by Eliphas Levi in his book Transcendental Magic, Its Doctrine and Ritual. So it's satanic. All right, so we got the statue. It was unveiled in Detroit, Michigan,
on the 9th of Av, guys. At the time, the little horn, who is Obama, was in Africa. I believe he was in Kenya at the time, and in his message, you can see it, he talked about this veiled reference of the sacrifices in Michigan. And he was talking about, he's in Kenya talking about the bombings there of the embassy. It made no sense, but what he was making reference to, guys, was, it wasn't a Freudian slip. He was talking about the satanic statue that was happening in Detroit the same day.
So, on the 9th of Av, and the day that both temples were destroyed, July 25th, 2015, we have the trigger of Daniel's timer. We have the Baphomet statue. We have the second little horn of Daniel 8. So you can see this little horn is connected to these 2,300 days. We have this little horn, Daniel 7, connected to this 2,300 days. So now we have a trigger point. See this line here? This line, okay, now you have a trigger point. Something must happen here, okay, which would tell us when this would happen. So that was the 9th of Av, 25th July 2015. Then we have 790 days. We have the Day of Atonement, the sign of the woman clothed with the sun. Okay. Now, we always seek confirmation on all of this. Okay. So now, we saw we had two witnesses. We have the Apostle John in Revelation. We have Daniel with this whole timeline here. Okay. But we always seek witnesses. So just before we saw two witnesses, we actually have a third witness in Ezra. So with these numbers, if this is right, Most High, you have to give me another witness. I found it in the book of Ezra chapter 8. In the book of Ezra chapter 8, it lists men. The first one, his name is Daniel, connecting us to the Daniel timeline. Now, the amount of men that are listed there is 1,510. Now, these men relate to days. So if we take the 1,510 men, we convert them to days, it applies to this timeline. Because when we go from this line here, Day of Atonement, and we go from right here, we count 1,510 days, it brings us to the same exact identical point of the abomination that makes desolate. See that? Okay? So we have confirmation by the number of people that the same Day of Atonement, the same marker of the beginning of the 7 years, okay, we have 1,510 days. Now, it also lists in Ezra chapter 8, verse 20, it says there are 220 Nethinims, or temple servants. So this is also the number of days between the Day of Atonement here and the vision of the daily sacrifice. Okay.
Lied. Big time. After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear files. In 2017, Iran moved its nuclear weapons files to a highly secret location in Tehran. A few weeks ago, in a great intelligence achievement, Israel obtained half a ton of the material inside these vaults. And here's what we got. 55,000 pages. Another 55,000 files on 183 CDs. And finally, the Iran deal, the nuclear deal, is based on lies. It's based on Iranian lies and Iranian deception. 100,000 files right here prove that they lie.
Okay, 220 days. So this is our confirmation that this is accurate. This is correct. Okay, so clearly we can see Daniel gives us the information that lines up perfectly, agrees perfectly with Revelation. This is important. In Daniel 11, verse 31, it states, "They shall pollute the temple fortress." And take away the daily sacrifice and place the abomination of desolation. Now, what this is telling us is a few things. First off, the temple, the third temple, is a fortress or built on a fortress. We know that to be Fortress Antonia. And the taking away of the daily sacrifice and the abomination of desolation here is described as the same time or the same point. So remember before we said the vision of the daily sacrifice. So there would have to be a sign or an indication of what took place on that daily sacrifice. So we'll get into that in a moment. But this is where the King James says, and the arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary, or third temple, of strength. But strength everywhere else in Daniel, okay, is ma'oz, and it's a fortified place. It's a fortress. Okay, so it's a sanctuary, mikdash, temple. So when the Jews say the third temple, they say the Beit HaMikdash. Sanctuary, fortress, ma'oz, fortified place. Okay, and they will take away the daily sacrifice and place the abomination that makes desolate. So this is telling us that it's technically the same day. So we can clearly see from Revelation chapter 12, the Revelation timetable, where we have the Day of Atonement, we have the sign of the woman clothed with the sun, September 22nd, 2017. Then we have 7 years. We could clearly see from Daniel that there's 2 little horns. There's a little horn in Daniel 7. There's a little horn in Daniel 8. They are not the same person. We have shown you the trigger event to start this, which will give us the days leading. We've shown you the major markers, okay? Here, here, here. And one thing we want to point out as well, actually 2 things. First off, you can see we've made a point here of years. You see it's 14 years. We know that the apocalypse of the Lord Jesus Christ is actually 14 years. There's 7 good years, okay? 7 years until Esther is prepared, and 7 bad years, okay? So we're just making note of those years as it relates to the time period. Now, the other thing that we have to mention before we conclude and wrap it up, guys, we'll make all these notes available for you. You can take the time to study this, read Daniel chapter 8, go through all this yourself to understand, familiarize yourself, and this is a great witnessing tool. You can take this and show people, say, look, this is the time that we're in, okay? These are fulfillment of things that have happened. Another major one in the years is Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. It says there will be 62 weeks and 7 weeks. Well, we know this goes from 1948. If you go 1948 and you add 62 weeks, these are years. We know these are years because Daniel chapter 5, verse 29 says it's 62 years. If you add those, that brings you to 2010. From 2010, that's the first 7 years, okay? And then it says there's 62 weeks and 7 weeks. So you add the other 7 weeks, that brings you to 2017, okay? So the scriptures are consistent about this Day of Atonement, about the sign of the woman clothed with the sun, 2017. Okay, Daniel's timeline shows us when that starts, when that happens. So guys, I will have the notes. I will have a link to the playlist on this. This is a summary video. This will be our intro video to Daniel's timeline. So guys, thanks for watching. And watch and pray that you be accounted worthy to escape all these things. In Jesus Christ's name, amen.